SouthCoast Swish.
You are either all the way in or you are all the way out. And there is no in between.
It's Chris Dodson with SouthCoast Swish here with one of my best friends on the beat, Fletcher Mackel from WDSU, covering the Pelicans and pretty much all sports in the south of Louisiana. But he's here to talk Pelicans with us today. Fletcher, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. Nice introduction there. Good to see you.
Hey, you've given me so many breaks and opportunities. I appreciate that thing on the, that Sunday game on before I went to do the SBC program in Vegas. You've done a lot to help out not only myself, but 4 or 5 other of the guys on the beat, Schmidt, Jared Reed. So you've done a lot to help the younger guys on this beat try and get their feet wet in the TV game.
Yeah, well, I mean, y'all do a great job. So, I mean, to me, I'm always one of these people that wants people that are know what's going on, do a great job covering it. And, you, Schmidt, Josh, Jake Madison. So a lot of really good dudes that do a great job, I think, covering the Pelicans. So to me, the more I can have good people on, that's good content for us. So selfishly, it's good for us.
Right. And I like to joke around to the other national media guys and people I've seen at Summer League that I like the Pelicans beat being 7 people deep, so to speak. You have somebody for every day of the week. And there's, it's not like a New York thing where it's got 40 or 50 people in the press scrums. We've literally, between myself and you, there's only 5 or 6 other people that are literally in the building, in the locker rooms as media personalities. And I kind of like our small little crowd.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a good group. I sometimes I do wish it was a little bit bigger, but then sometimes I kind of enjoy the intimacy of it and getting to know, the players, the coaches, the PR people, the who's who and the what's what.
Right. And we'll get into all that. First, we'll get to your origin story. Most of the times I ask people when did they first fall in love with the game. But this being Fletcher Mackel, I've got to ask, when did you first fall in love with the trade machine?
Right away. I mean, so I always joke and tell people that I wasn't like some diehard NBA. We didn't have. I was too young. I mean, I was very, very young when the Jazz left New Orleans. So I don't have concrete memories of the Jazz. My parents didn't take me to and if they did, I was an infant. So I don't really remember going to the Dome or Loyola's Fieldhouse for a Jazz game or anything like that. And then growing up here, of course, Michael Jordan was a big deal during my childhood. But since we didn't have a team here, it wasn't like I was some basketball aficionado. It wasn't really until I started working here at WDSU in the summer of '02. And that's when the team relocated here from Charlotte. And it was like hook, line, sinker. I always joke that some people find religion. I found the NBA and have loved covering it ever since. And the craziness of it sometimes, with some of the crazy salaries and the trades that happen. But what I've liked about it is, we have a real well-educated football fan base here. And we all, I mean, my mom understands what a salary cap casualty is and almost how the inner workings of an NFL team. But people don't seem to understand or at least in the same numbers of how the NBA works. Trades are part of the league. It happens because of the way the contracts are structured and how their league functions. So I have always just kind of liked that because it is, it's a huge part of the league, how team building is done.
Right, especially with the trade deadlines mid-season. Basketball and football, it's just not even different worlds. Football, you barely have any action, maybe 1 or 2 players. Basketball and the NBA, you might have 1 or 2 teams that sit it out. Everyone else is in that market, and that's what makes the trade machine so fun sometimes.
It is. It's great. And look, there's been teams that we can go through the history of the league and talk about trades that happened that pushed them over the top, or trades that happened just recently that blew up in their face. Kyrie to the Mavericks. I mean, I thought they were going to ascend instead they plummeted. And so I'm not sure how it works this season, but it's just a part of it. In football, guys are forced into pay cuts. Guys are released. Money isn't guaranteed. Teams can reshape and restructure their rosters in the offseason in a major way as far as an overhaul goes. Whereas in basketball, it's harder. So, in-season trades, trade deadline deals are far more impactful than in a sport like football, where a lot of the work in that capacity is done in the offseason.
Right, and I like to say that football, it's any given Sunday, next man up. There's a lot of, I would say, replacement level players just by the sheer volume of college athletes that are wanting to get to the NFL. You look at the NBA and you get to the bottom of those rosters, your replacement level players stand out way more than say a fifth round running back in the NFL that you can kind of plug and play. There's not as much plug and play. The NBA is a star driven league. And when you get down there, them trades matter, and you really have to get into the minutia of it all.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that separates like the really, really elite teams. Like there's a lot of good teams, but there are a few great teams, and the ones that have really cultivated their depth and have been able to find diamonds in the rough or make those sneaky trades, because down the stretch they're going to need that guy. And there is an unsung hero, it seems like. And you go back and you see the origin story, and he was a under the radar trade deadline deal, or it was an off-season deal where he was a throw-in player because the team wasn't just worried about their stars, they were worried about quality depth. And to me, Golden State's always done a great job with that. Boston's done a nice job with that. And I don't think it's any coincidence that those teams recently have both played for championships.
Right. And we can start with the big names, but the way you just mentioned throw in players, Larry Nance Jr. just got back to town yesterday, day before, and he was a throw in to that deal, which I think looks better and better every day for this front office, considering how much they've put CJ up front for the schedule release, how much he's been outspoken. Larry's been outspoken in the Twitter spaces and on podcast. From what they've done off the court, I think that trade looks better and better for this front office.
Yeah, look, Larry Nance is one of those guys. I mean, obviously, I followed him, and I'm sure I had him in some kind of trade at some point because he is a bouncy, versatile player that he's never going to be a star, but he's what every championship caliber team needs. He can play small ball center. He can be, he can guard all the way down to threes. He can certainly guard fours. And so I think also from a quote unquote gets it standpoint, he gets it. I mean, like his dad was an NBA player. He grew up around the league. He seems wise beyond his years. People gravitate to him. So I think you're right. Look, Portland was going in a different direction. He was coming off an injury. They wanted to move off his salary to kind of reshape their roster. And he was, you're right. He would be called a throw in, but that was a huge, uh, addition for the Pelicans, and I think it will be even more so this year. I think Larry Nance is going to be, in line for a really, really impactful season this year.
Right, and then he's going to be in line for a nice raise. I've called him pretty much Lamar Odom light for this team, and what Lamar was for those Lakers teams. Larry can just do it all, and everybody loves being around him. You see him joking on social media and those sorts of things. So Larry really brings a lot of chemistry and culture to this locker room, which I like the continuity to get to that. I like the continuity. You have to take David Griffith at his word, or at least I did when he said tweaks this offseason, not big moves in the the exit interviews. Do you think more people will start taking David Griffin, one, at his word when he says stuff like that? And two, what did you think about the stand pat off season, so to speak?
So one, I'm a big Griff fan. Like I really like Griff. I think I always tell people this. The results haven't been what they wanted. Certainly, that's the ultimate goal, to win championships, to have a winning product. But as somebody who's covered this franchise a long time, it is a night and day franchise. Like I remember going out there before, and it just felt like guys had one foot out the door. They weren't as invested. Now, like the positivity is tangible out there. I mean, you've got guys that truly want to be here, do things the right way. They have cultivated something that is special. And so I tell everybody that the only thing Griff hasn't delivered is consistent winning, which is the most important thing. But he has built an infrastructure and an ecosystem that is better than any of his predecessors have built. And he's been able to cultivate and get buy-in with Trajan and Swin and the guys they found in the draft and the undrafted guys and the free agents they've brought in. Everybody. I mean, I'm leaving out analytics people and scouts. Everything they've done has turned this organization into something that is far more real and at a competitive NBA level that it needs to be at, not kind of like a forgotten stepchild like they may have been before, owned and operated by football people that basketball just wasn't at the forefront. That being said, to answer your question, I look at it and I say, I'm not sure I take Griff at his word and think the stand pat. I certainly think that, I think when they went to the offseason, there was like we could take paths 1, 2, or 3. And stand pat mostly was one of those paths. Does that mean that was the path they tried to walk down? I don't think so. Like I think they tried to get Scoot Henderson. And I think that it was one of those moves where they discussed Zion and they discussed BI. And look, I know people do word gymnastics, and I love Woj. He's like a god to me. But when he says he was never offered, well, that's very carefully worded. Like when Woj says things like, you know, no GM told me they were offered Zion. Well, that's true. They weren't offering him to 29 other teams, and they never got to the point of here he is. But they had discussions on what it would take with certain teams to get up to get that pick to get a player they wanted. So I think they did stand the course, and they knew that that was an option. It wasn't like they went into the offseason saying blow this up. This group can't function properly. But I think if they would have had their wish, I think they would have probably done a soft reset, so to say, and gone with Scoot and kind of built maybe on Zion's timeline or with some of these younger guys. I don't know how dead set they are in believing that this team with these guys can win the championship and we just need health. Because even if they have health, there's still questions about their 3-point shooting and their rebounding and in interior defense, because that's not Jonas. So again, I don't know if standing pat was we're 100% committed to this unwavering. I think that was an option if they couldn't. They weren't blowing it up to blow it up, but they weren't just let's stand pat and run it back. I think that they were, if they could have gotten certain deals done, they would have done it. They couldn't. Therefore, they are standing pat. But that wasn't, this is it. We're committed to this right away.
Right, and I believe about the same thing, heard about the same thing. They did their due diligence with no real concern on whose feelings it might hurt because those lines of communication have been open. We've seen it with Zion there when Spoon got let go. We've heard Brandon Ingram talk about how if there was a rumor or something popping up in the news, Griff would call him, and that those communication lines were open. I think there were some offers out there. They had their line in the sand. They had the things they would not do to soft reset, soft blow up, whatever you want to call it. And they didn't just go into the season thinking no tweaks. We're not even going to worry about calls. I think they did a lot of work, and they just didn't find the right market for a JV or Kyra is still out there, and they weren't going to sell for 60 cents on the dollar. 85 cents you might have got them with a second round pick, but there just wasn't those extra. There was just too much in the middle for them to negotiate.
Yeah, and look, and I'll say this: I the one thing I've learned about Griff is he's big on heart and he's big on feelings. That some people in this business are cold blooded. Like the Patriots, it's an emotionless business for them. When they were at the top of their game with Tom Brady, people in Boston told me that Belichick has no emotion. It's like you perform, and if you don't, there's no sentimentality in this. Whereas Griff is just the opposite. He needs talent, but he is a sentimental, committed person who believes in the human factor of it.
Yeah, the human element. We've heard that a lot.
Human element. And I do think that that's one of the reasons why he's been reluctant to really part with BI, even in trade discussions last year for Kevin Durant. It was, look, we're committed to him. He's committed to us. And even to Zion, like to an extent, maybe not the same extent as BI. And you just mentioned JV and Kyra. I think last year it was a little bit same with Devontae Graham. Jose basically took over all those minutes, and Devontae Graham was a guy that I thought was going to be moved in the offseason. But I think Griff is committed to the human factor of it. Like these guys in the locker room fit in, like Willie Hernan-Gomez last year. He was an MVP in Europe, probably would have had more playing time with other teams, but they didn't ever want to part with him because I think he was a good culture guy. The teammates liked him. He was a solid reserve, but I could have seen him moving on. I could have seen Devontae moving on last summer. I really thought that they obviously have explored deals for Kyra in JV. I think there's a human factor into that they've seen Kyra grow and rehab his injury, and they feel like he's on the cusp of something. And then with JV, he's been the consummate professional. He's a workhorse. He never complains, even when Willie wouldn't play him at the end of games. So I do think they like that. Now, that being said, I do think Griff has gotten in a little trouble because of that. Like Devontae Graham last offseason, you may have been able to get an asset for, but because his worth continued to plummet, you had to give San Antonio 4 second-round draft picks to dump his salary then. So I do wonder about like you just said, if they could have sold JV and Kyra at 60 cents on the dollar, they wanted 80. they may end up taking 40, just like they did with Devontae, or even going into the red, so to say, because they held on to these guys too long. So I do think I love Griff for that he, unlike a lot of people in pro sports, cares about the people. And that's why I think even when guys get traded, they speak very highly of him and the organization. But I do think the responsibility has to be to, not just burning assets and blowing assets. And again, he's, like Devontae Graham left here talking about how great it was, how happy he was, how well they treated him. But it also cost him 4 second-round draft picks when last summer they may have been able to actually move him for an asset instead of paying to get rid of him. So I am curious to see what happens with Kyra in JV, because I think there were probably deals out there that they just felt we're not going to do it. But if things don't break right this season, they may end up paying to give them away.
Right. And I think Devontae Graham and a few other trades, like it, Griff is starting to be where he can't I guess, negotiate with the most leverage. When he had AD, most of that trade package was probably negotiated before he even took the job. There's only Boston and LA out there. But LA really needed AD. When Drew come up, the team that he had the most leverage on, the team that needed Drew the most was Milwaukee, so that Giannis would sign that next contract. He's lost those big names to trade where he can operate with the most leverage and squeeze the most out of a team that really needs the most out of the market. And now the Pelicans need some. We swapped Adams for JV, Devontae Graham. It seems like Griff's losing a little bit of how he can strong arm these negotiations because the nature of the team has changed. The dynamic of the team has changed. The locker room needs something different. And now they're actually playing for something. Those first 2 years, Griff could just kind of build on his own pathway and his own timeline. Now I think there's a little bit more pressure, even if you're not going to pay the luxury tax. If you're healthy, you got to go win.
Yeah, and look, and that's the thing. You just mentioned, like, I think he got the best of the deals for Anthony Davis and for Drew Holiday. Those were teams, the Lakers obviously wanted Anthony Davis at all costs. And then Milwaukee, because of Giannis, was on the cusp of a championship and needed one more player to push them over the finish line. And it ended up being Drew. It's the deals down the food chain, so to say, where he hasn't exactly knocked it out the park. And I'll say this, they've done a good job in the draft, even undrafted guys with Jose and with Trey. And I'm curious to see what Makovich becomes. And so obviously Herb, but it's it's some of the deals like, look, Favors to Adams to JV, Devontae Graham, like some of the mid-level pieces, so to say, is where he hasn't excelled at finding the right pieces to work with the guys he has. The big ticket items, he's nailed it. The 2 big mega trades he's nailed. And I think in the draft, Trajan and Bryson have done a great job of identifying players. And look, Trajan did a great job in Brooklyn. The drafts they had, they killed when they had no lottery picks, and they built that team from the ashes. So I think that's where they excel. But it's some of kind of like, look, JJ Redick, they gave a lot of money to, and while he was great on TV, he was a shell of himself as a player. And then down the stretch, it just wasn't the right fit. And so again, those are some of the moves that I look at and say, he struggled with, and he better not struggle with him anymore. Because I do think you're right. We're at the point now of, I think this is a really, I hate to use the term like a critical juncture because it sounds cliche, but at a certain point, like the injuries can't be an excuse, and these guys haven't played together enough can't be an excuse. Like at a certain point, it's just, it's just not right, and it's not working, and he's in charge, and I think he knows that. So I do think this is a very critical year for him, that the play-in isn't enough this year. That to me, the only way he continues to operate this franchise is if they are clear of the play-in. Even if they deal with a rash of injuries, even if the pieces don't fit, he needs to go out and figure out what does work then, because I do think there's far more pressure this year than, at any other time since he took over in 2019.
Right. And these guys have now had a few training camps, practices. They might not have got the regular season reps in, but they've had time to at least get to learn each other. And to that last point on Griff, I think he even operated with good leverage in that Portland trade. He reminds me of a lot of the poker player who plays the big hands great, but can't play the small hands that well. And their variance, at the table kind of fluctuates. And they might go all in and win everything, but they might also, in waiting for that big hand, kind of two-pair and check call themselves down until they don't really have a stack to work with. I hope that didn't happen to Griff. I don't think the Pelicans are anywhere near there yet. They're still a couple years away. When Zion's next contract and BI's next contract, that's when you have to worry about not having enough at the table to play the poker game that the NBA is for Griff. But right now, I think he's set up pretty well. Fletcher, we've got you for a few 20 minutes. Don't want to go too crazy. I know you got a show at 5 to do. Just last thoughts on what you think this team's going to be, knowing Zion's been in the practice facility and has been in town and all the things that are coming out this week now, even with the schedule. We now know exactly the path to the playoffs.
Yeah, look, I think they're going to be good. Last year, I thought, look, they again, whatever people want to say about the sample size, playing bad teams, they ascended to one in the West. Look, I talked to a lot of people who felt like it was always a 3-team race. It was Denver, New Orleans, and Memphis. Things went sideways with Memphis with Ja Morant. Things went sideways with New Orleans with the injuries. And Denver ran away with it and then won the championship. Again, I don't know if this team's championship ready, but I just think if they stay healthy, then they should be a top 4 or 5 seed. Like, there's no reason why they shouldn't be. If you've got Zion healthy a full season, if Brandon Ingram is committed and locked in for a full season, CJ to me was the warrior last year. He's going to be committed and locked in. He's just got to be healthy. And then I think obviously the young players they have around him, I look at a team and say, like, why wouldn't they be? I mean, I could look at him and say, they're not a lot different than Memphis. They're not a lot different than Denver. They're not a lot different than Sacramento. Like, if they'd have stayed healthy last year, Sacramento finished 3. Why can't they be what Sacramento was last year? So I think, they've got the right pieces. They just need to, stay healthy. And look, I certainly think they can make a tweak, because I don't think Jonas fits. And I certainly think they could maybe use another like big that could stretch the floor a little bit. But I just think that this team, last year I thought they were good, and they were good until they just got railroaded out of the picture by injuries. I still think they're a pretty good team. I think Willie's a good coach, and I think he learned a lot. So I think they're going to be good.
Yeah, Willie learned a lot. I think the big man thing will be solved next year. Carlo, I was there draft night. Carlo's my guy. I've been watching him for years. So I can't wait to see that. Can't wait to see you in the gym. Sure, we got media day, the last Monday in September, and I'm sure we'll all be there, and we'll see what happens. So, Fletcher, thanks again, man.
All right, Chris, no problem.
SouthCoast Swish.
You were either all the way in or you were all the way out. And there is no in between.
Like, this South got something to say. That's all I got to say.